Welcome to the Libertarian Counterpoint. I'm Richard Fields. On the program today, we have Matt Fleming, a journalist, and he runs the calwatchdog.com website. Welcome to the show. John Cameron, the author of Rewire and Rekill, and Janine Kloss, the Sacramento and California executive director of the Big L Libertarian Party and a colleague at Foundation for Harmony and Prosperity. Welcome to the show, everybody. We're on live at Channel 17 in Sacramento, on YouTube, on, let's see here, cable channels all over the place. You can watch us live where we're live, streaming live at www.accesssacramento.org at 8 p.m. Thursday, noon Friday, 4 a.m. on Saturday, all Pacific time. Cap and trade has made it really, really difficult for people who produce any kind of carbon dioxide in their manufacturing process, or however, anything that burns a fuel or fossil fuel of any kind. But the cap and trade is doing one other thing. It's raising a hell of a lot of money, like $2 billion a year or something like that, $10 billion over 10 years. The question I have, and I think you guys have done some research on it, where is that money actually being spent? What's the legislature doing with it?
Well, they're
John,
passing
Matt?
a huge chunk of it, 40% out, basically political favors, glad handing, and instead of passing it out as cash, they're just giving it to their favorites. So, there's some other big buckets, and the other big buckets are, various forms of rail, affordable housing. But it's a scam, and what upsets me is when I like to Google things just to see how the wind's blowing. And so the first thing that came up was, and this is the Environmental Defense Fund's explanation of what a wonderful thing cap and trade was. Is a logical and market-based way to prevent the horrors of global warming. I put in the word horror; it wasn't quite that, and the first 3 or 4 things that came up when I Googled it were all basically propaganda for the Greens. There was no discussion really of cap and trade as cap and trade. It was just Green propaganda. So that's what's upsetting to me about it, and the fact that it's really just why don't they just say, well, the coming alien invasion is statistically a very high probability within the next 100 years. We need to prepare for that by nationalizing the world instead of the global warming thing. It makes it just sense.
The global warming, of course, is the excuse for cap and trade. The ostensible necessity of getting rid of all carbon dioxide production by
don't exhale.
Combustion. Yeah, don't exhale, don't breathe, don't light a match. But of course, and if you buy the premise that global warming is a danger, and that carbon is the evil gas that will kill us all eventually, or flood the world, or whatever it's supposed to do. If you buy the premise, cap and trade makes a lot of sense, because it's a market-based way of making people use markets to produce or burn less fossil fuel and use more wind energy or solar energy or whatever. It makes sense from a market standpoint. But the premise, of course, is probably faulty. The other problem with cap and trade is that it creates this huge boondoggle of a whole lot of money being spent by industry and anybody that in any way burns fuel, which means really people, because everybody drives and everybody buys gasoline, or most people buy gasoline when they drive their car, truck, or diesel truck. So it raises the cost of everything. It raises the cost of doing business. It raises the cost of being a consumer in California dramatically. And all of that money goes into essentially a state slush fund. 20% of it supposedly is going for affordable housing. 40%, as you mentioned, is going into essentially a political slush fund for the wise men of Sacramento to put wherever, to give to whoever they want to give it to. But the interesting thing is that 40%, 25% high-speed rail, 10% intercity rail, and 5% low-carbon transit are direct subsidies to transportation that is essentially rail-based. And anybody that has any modicum of intelligence when it comes to the economics of rail, it doesn't make economic sense. The rail project, the high-speed rail project that was originally supposed to go from San Francisco to Los Angeles and be high-speed all the way and take an hour or two to get from one city to the other has been morphed into a mixed rail system, part high-speed, part low-speed, taking twice as long to make the journey, and meanwhile,
from Salinas to Modesto.
yeah, and meanwhile the cost has doubled or tripled or something like that.
Well, if you have an issue and you really believe in global warming, and your solution is to charge for the right to put out emissions, it doesn't really make sense because it's a pay to play. You're not actually helping the problem. It's just whoever has the most money can do what they'd like with it. The other thing is, if they really cared about this issue, the list of items that the money is going towards would be innovation to change how we produce things or travel or whatever, all these different areas of concern, instead of simply going to line pockets or do other pet projects.
Well, in theory, the 40% political grab bag, if you will, is supposed to encourage that. It is supposed to be a place where legislators will come up with ideas to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is, consistent with the law. But that's what they're supposed to do, is reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And a lot of the proposals that have come forward, some people would argue would probably be more likely to achieve that goal than others. But the other thing that I've noticed, in hearing people complain about it, obviously most of the legislators on the right don't like anything that has to do with high-speed rail. I mean, anything that funds high-speed rail, they wanted to fund that. So that's one of the biggest areas of contention. The other is the challenge to the fact that many people view the system of cap and trade as a unconstitutional tax, in that it charges people, right? It charges businesses, this auction system, but it wasn't approved with 2/3 of the legislature. So it was approved by AB 32, which was approved with simple majority. And then the CARB, the California Air Resources Board, implemented this auction system, and people are challenging it right now in the courts.
Yeah, Pacific
You mean
Legal
they're not
Foundation.
following the rules?
Pacific Legal Foundation, for whom I work.
Well, the courts haven't decided that.
Can we let the cat out of the bag?
Sure.
Yeah, and for whom John works.
I know
John and I work
work, yeah,
for Pacific Legal Foundation, and we have one of the major lawsuits, which challenges cap and trade on that basis, that it's unconstitutional on the basis of not being a legally enacted tax because of that 2/3 rule. So
Can we touch base back on rail? If you look at freight rail in places where it's, any kind of rail, in places where there's competitive rail, rail is one of the absolute lowest cost ways of moving anything. Once the rails are in place, the amount of energy used to move things on rail is, I think, comparable to container ships. I mean, it's the quantity, the mass moved for the energy expended. So if we didn't have highly regulated, highly unionized, government-mandated rail, if there was competition in the rail market, as there used to be when the country exploded during the early industrial age here, rail would make sense. I mean, it's really good use of resources. And if you look at what we do now, one person gets in one car to go from point A to point B, and we like that. It's a really inefficient, energy-intensive way to move people. So theoretically, rail is a good answer, but the rail that we have now is so overregulated, and the rail carriers are so unionized, and you can't, would it take you 10 years to move a track somewhere, even if it got fast-tracked by the government? So, the idea of rail being efficient is actually a good idea, but the way rail is regulated and used, it makes it one of the worst possible forms of transportation.
I'm not a scientist. Somebody explained to me why a rail turning or a wheel turning on steel is so much more efficient than a rubber wheel turning on pavement.
Yeah, I think the theory is that it reduces dependency on automobiles.
Well, no. Okay, so it's
there's more people in the
if you
car.
look at
a lot of the policies that are coming out right now, it's to reduce people using
so
cars.
it's
But if
just
you look
basically
at-
putting more people in the car, so to speak.
Yeah.
Well, my point is and I don't remember, but if you go to any freight, if you go to a rail association, they have some numbers that are frighteningly efficient. Just to,
Yeah, right. And I'm just curious,
you're
as a
looking
matter
at
of
a 100
curiosity.
train car that's loaded with, you know,
Why is that more efficient than a semi-truck? It's just less friction or something?
economies of scale.
Okay, yeah.
Basically, it's an economy of scale.
Yeah, and
And
if-
once the mass gets moving, you know, then maintaining
They don't have to
that
stop at stop
forward
signs?
movement. Well, there's not very many, unless you're trying to get somewhere on a train, and then they find some.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if Los Angeles ever really got a truly functioning metro system that the city depended on, I mean, in theory, all of the trips that are carrying people, you know, from one stop to the next, that's taking all of those people out of their cars, which in Los Angeles would probably be a noticeable reduction in traffic, maybe a noticeable reduction in greenhouse gases. I don't know. I know with the high-speed rail, the projections that they have, it could, in theory, have a tremendous impact on greenhouse gas emissions, but the projections are so far out that I believe AB 32 has a timeline. I think it has to be done by 2020 or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think the projections will
Well,
way through
it's a graduated timeline. Some things by 2020, some
Well,
things by 2040.
Mm-hmm.
It gets
The
more
way
and
the
more
law was-
stringent as time
Yeah.
goes by.
We don't beat this to death, but the way the law was written, it was really, really specific. When the bond funds were raised, when the bonds were issued, there were very specific parameters on it. And I think you could probably challenge it that it's fraud. They raised the money for one thing, and they're doing another thing with it.
When the government, when the president does it, it's not fraud. No, I mean, when the government does it, it's not fraud.
If a corporation,
We heard that from
even
Tricky Dick, I think.
even a
long time ago.
AAA rated corporation put out a bond issue to do capital improvement, and then use the money for hookers and blow, and I think that's an accurate parallel here. They'd go to jail. But with the government doing it, it was a shell game.
Well, speaking of blow, there's a bill working its way through the California legislature
Nice segue.
that has to do with the drug wars, and the one of the favorite tools of police agencies across the country, to a lesser extent in California, but it's still being used in California, is civil asset forfeiture. Civil asset forfeiture. You wanted to explain what that is, Matt?
Yeah, it's a process by which law enforcement agents can take assets. A lot of times, most of the time, it's cash. Can take assets that they believe is, complicit in some kind of drug or illegal activity, and they can just take it.
Without any charge as to
A lot of the time
without
without a charge. Yeah, in
Without a charge,
California,
without a conviction, without anything.
Yeah.
California, fortunately, California's in one weird case is actually pretty good compared to a lot of places.
true, but so California has a law where it requires a conviction over
Over
$25,000.
Yeah.
But there's a federal law that trumps that police agencies have been using to get around that, where it's called equitable sharing. If they partner with a federal
Yeah,
agency,
If the feds help them steal the
Wow.
money, and they
They
give
have
the
to kick up
feds
20%
20% of the money, then they can get around that 25,000.
Well,
So-
there's actually a revenue line item in their budget
Yeah.
for it, correct?
yeah, I think I saw a document dump that showed LAPD bought a $5 million helicopter with the equitable sharing program funds. So it pays. I mean, and the bill. So what the bill would do is close that loophole and require a conviction for any amount, which doesn't seem like that's it seems like that's a pretty a no-brainer kind
I'm guessing
kind of deal.
that the police and sheriff's departments all over the
Yeah,
state
the
are raising
California
Police-
hell.
District
yeah.
Attorneys Association really hates it. Really hates
Because
the
it
bill.
breaks their budget.
Yeah.
And they
They're-
say it impedes their ability to investigate also.
I only heard the
Investigate laws
argument.
which they shouldn't be enforcing in the first place because they shouldn't be laws, but that's another story.
I heard that their biggest challenge to it when they're talking within, I guess, your echo chamber, if you will, is that that's their most steady stream of revenue, which is kind of startling.
That's it.
Yeah.
The same people, if you hooked them up to a cattle prod and got them to tell the truth, they would say the reason they don't want drugs legalized is that it would mean staff cuts. It's that simple. These laws allow them to hire people, send people on trips, buy toys. I mean, why does every town of over 50,000 people need a hostage negotiator and a SWAT team.
Yeah.
They don't.
And a tank or
And a
armored
tank,
personnel carrier.
Well, and if
And
it's
he's the old
a
cop,
value
though.
thing where the citizenry wants a well-funded police agency, that's great. I think Holly Mitchell's point and a lot of other legislators' point, and maybe I'd agree with her also, is that they just shouldn't fund it with my cash or
Well,
I mean, there should be
here's
a conviction is not
That's
an
patently
onerous
a violation
requirement.
of the Constitution.
Here's a factoid that is absolutely amazing. The factoid is that the federal government and government in general, through asset forfeiture, steals more money than all of the armed robbery and all of the cops and robbers, all of the criminals combined in the country.
Well, it's a lot easier when it's legal.
And the stories are
But it's not
insane too.
Well, it's legal because they say it is.
But people will be driving. One guy was driving to go get his daughter a used car, and he had $10,000 on him. It's just like a regular guy. They pull him over, see that he has $10,000 in cash, which, could be a red flag, right? Anybody driving around $10,000 cash is at least, they could. If
I
a
don't
law
think
enforcement
so, but-
agent wanted to
Why?
at least ask the question, it's fine, right? But the guy didn't get his money back for like 9 months, and
Well, there's a guy that didn't get his money back. At the
others
federal
don't even
level
get their
for
money back at all.
8 years? No,
Yeah.
more. He's still suing to get his money back.
yeah.
Well,
And
we
he-
can agree that it's ridiculous, and if I remember correctly, David Hadley sponsored a bill the last session, and it got killed. So I'm wondering how
I
this
think
one's going to fare.
This is the same bill. It was
Same one?
Yeah, it was eligible for reconsideration, so it passed the Senate. It doesn't have to pass the Senate again, I don't believe, unless it was amended. But it passed the Senate, and then at the very last second, law enforcement put just
Oh yeah.
the SWAT team blast on all of the assembly members, and it died.
So who do we want to give kudos to in the legislature? Who is it that's carrying this bill? And is,
Holly Mitchell, David Hadley.
Okay.
Republican and a Democrat.
Yeah, and Joel Anderson today
Yeah.
was down in San Diego, had a huge event on this issue.
yeah, we complain about politicians all the time on this show for good reason, but whenever they actually do something right, we like to point it out. And these
And
guys
it's-
are doing something right.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it's bipartisan too, which
Yeah.
is
Well, it's
pretty
nice,
impressive.
nice to see that, and that's why we're probably going to talk about libertarian. But some things make sense, and to anybody who has any interest in the Republicans' property rights
Mhm.
and the left civil liberties, and they both came together on this. And
Yeah.
besides that, this is patently unconstitutional.
Well, there's some
And I
things
don't
you just
know why
wonder,
it
why
hasn't
isn't
been
this already
Challenged
in
and
place?
eliminated years ago.
Exactly. So if it's a no-brainer and people come together on it, it's kind of sad in California that that's the only way we can really get something
Oh,
relevant.
California actually.
Well, I think
compared to
you've got
some
you
states-
got a public choice
Yeah.
theory
Yeah.
problem here. The public choice is that you've got a lot of noise coming from the police unions and the police departments and sheriffs and so forth, and they're really making their voice heard in the legislature. And you've got just a very, you've got a relatively few number of people that are actually directly affected by asset forfeiture because their stuff got taken, and the general population as a whole doesn't even know what's going on. So it's dispersed cost.
Well, this is
And
why we
that's
continually
that's
push
why,
for.
That's why
Yeah.
it continues.
When we continually push, especially in Sacramento, where we've been working for about 3 years now, we push people to learn the system and participate in the system. Because you're exactly right. If you only have negative forces in there feeding information to the people who are supposed to make decisions, the decisions aren't
Gonna be
going to
negative.
be reflective of what people actually want. And so without the citizen participation, the system doesn't work, especially in a republic, which is supposed to be the form of government
This
we
is
have.
where I think, and Ed, you mentioned that the fact that people don't know what's going on until somebody they know is affected or they read a news item, and this is a case where some kind of educational outreach would really, as you're doing, do a great job. Because I mean, if you pulled 100 people off the street and told them this and asked them about it, I'm willing to bet that 70 of them wouldn't even know what's going on. And all of them, once told, unless they're husband, wife, police officer, or somebody directly benefiting from it, would be aghast at it. It's just, it's
Well,
horrible.
And I think once you start making constitutional arguments beyond the First and Second Amendment, you lose a lot of the citizenry.
We've had
That's so
we've had
sad.
we've had a weather year in California, first year in several in which we have adequate rainfall. It's not a drought year, and still we're hearing from California agencies that we need to conserve water. And still, even though we've had lots of rain this year, Delta and other water users are on 5 to 25% water allocations. They're not getting their full allocations of water because, well, supposedly we haven't been able to catch up for all of the drought years. And at the same time, we're talking about tearing down dams, hydroelectric dams on the Klamath River. And hydroelectric, the last time I heard, is the most environmentally friendly way to produce electricity. No carbon fuel burned at all, and no danger of nuclear reactivity or anything like it. It's totally pollution free. What's up with tearing down hydroelectric dams on the Klamath River?
Yeah,
Jenny? Matt?
Sorry.
Well, I can give you kind of the citizens of Siskiyou County version of it, because that's where I'm from, and that whole area is very concerned about this change. So you're talking about removing a dam that in the summertime provides enough water that the fish don't die and create a health hazard, and during the rainy season controls the flooding in that area. So basically property owners along that stretch will be flooded out, and nobody really seems to care from the government side of it, because honestly I get the strong impression that they don't want people living up there anyway. But Matt was sharing some of the reasons behind this, so maybe you tell them the smart stuff, because I didn't know all this, and I was shocked after hearing what I've heard from people who live there.
Yeah, well, so a lot of the local Native American tribes, contrary to what you were just saying, I mean, this is what they believe. The dams have been up there for 100 years, so I'm not sure anybody entirely knows what's going to happen with the rivers once they take it off. But they say that the dams themselves are creating extremely hot water and algal blooms that end up killing the salmon themselves, and that a lot of these local tribes live off of the salmon. So I say that to say that that's the premise of the environmental argument. The government, from what I understand, wants Oregon and California and the federal government all want it gone. But the dams are privately owned. So they're owned by PacifiCorp, Warren Buffett Corporation. They are hydroelectric, and they're up for relicensing. If, in order to comply with the relicensing, they would have to do a lot of improvements to them. PacifiCorp decided it really wasn't worth it to them to do that, and so the government is going to give them a little bit of money to help them pay for the cost of decommissioning and removing these dams. I did ask about water storage, right? Because it's obviously a no-brainer question. Yeah. And I felt like they gave me a pretty good answer in that PacifiCorp isn't in the business of storing water. They would have to pay to turn these dams into water storage projects, and who's going to pay for that? And from their perspective, I can see why they wouldn't want to do that. I mean, it's not their business, it's not their responsibility. And they said that they only get about 1.8 of the local electricity from those dams, so they can, provide electricity in other ways without really even creating a problem. So, but yeah, like you said, there's a lot of local people that are distrustful of how it's been handled. Congress kind of derailed the agreement. They had an agreement in, about 2 years ago. Congress derailed that.
What was the agreement, the previous agreement?
To how to decommission them, but it was through the federal government. Oh, okay. Congress wanted oversight, derailed the whole thing, and so a lot of the interest groups have formed a non-government entity, which is now not subject to the federal government, which, as you can imagine, fed the distrust of the government from the local area.
Because it's not accountable to anybody, probably.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, and the concern for the property owners in that area is very real. And so environmentally, I would tend to veer towards, letting the land work the way the land works, and we move around that. But that's not what's been done.
Yeah.
And so I would question, especially based on how a lot of things are done in California, how those property owners will be treated. Is it going to be like an eminent domain issue where they just go in and force them to sell out in order to not have a huge flood risk? Or are they just going to say, well, let's see what happens.
I think those are all interesting questions.
Claremont-McKenna Student Programming Board has canceled screening of the movie Zoolander 2. My daughter, who is a college student, would be extremely upset about that because she's a big Zoolander fan. But instead, they're going to screen Deadpool. And as I understand it, the reason that the Student Programming Board does not like Zoolander 2 is because they objected to a bad transgender joke, something that was, I guess, I think they call it microaggression these days. Is it more of a microaggression to have a bad transgender joke or to have murder and mayhem, which is what I understand Deadpool is all about?
Yeah, it just seems like there are certain groups of people that you can't joke about.
Well, Deadpool pretty much covers the gamut of off-color jokes, so I'm not really sure that they trade it up.
Well, and, lots of comedies and
I haven't
race
seen either
jokes
one,
and-
so, but-
yeah, but I mean, lots of
Oh.
comedies have race jokes and gender jokes and all kinds of jokes, but I haven't seen either one, so I don't really know. But I did read about it, and it seems that
Well, I think the difference might be that Deadpool had a lot of critical acclaim, and Zoolander is just basically entertainment. And it's got critical acclaim. Then even if it's disgusting, that's the kind of things that kids see in
But
school.
by the same token, Book of Mormon was considered brilliant, and I mean,
It was brilliant.
It was.
I
brilliant.
saw it.
I saw it.
It was
I did actually
fantastic.
see that. I loved it.
Yeah.
But if you were African, I could see how you would be offended by it. It was particularly insensitive.
Not to mention
Africans.
Mormons.
And Mormons, yeah.
Well, see, I actually enjoyed Deadpool, but if my kids came home from school and they had watched that, I would be furious. They have no right to air something like that in school. And it goes back to the compulsory schooling system. Why do we have to participate? And why are kids forced to go to public school or
But
private
this is at
school
the
or
college
whatever?
level. This is at the college level.
Well, this is a college. I
Yeah,
apologize.
Claremont-McKenna.
Well, at a college level, they might enjoy Deadpool better. Zoolander's a little young. I changed my whole stance on
But
it.
everyone has the option of not going, also.
Yeah, well,
Well, if it's
And
a
not
college.
everyone is going to be offended by it.
Well, Zoolander
Right.
or Deadpool?
But why couldn't
probably
they do
either.
the
Yeah, somebody's gonna be
transgender
offended by
Just
joke
because somebody makes
in
a joke doesn't
college?
mean that every single person of that particular class is going to be offended.
Oh, we're going out on that.
Well,
You're saying that some
you know what?
transgender people can take a joke? Is that what you're saying?
I would like to believe so, yeah.
Why couldn't you joke in a college about that?
Well, microaggression, which is now illegal. You can't offend anybody at the college level, and I don't understand it, and I guess we're not going to figure out the reasons
Do you
for
ever
it
read
tonight.
Matt Labash with the Weekly Standard? He's probably the best writer that there is in the media.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote an article about the microaggressions,
Yeah.
and when he does, he goes into detail about it. It's one of the funniest things I've ever read, and so good.
We have a recommendation for further education here. That's the show. See you again next week.